lovely friends, it's Margaret, and it is time to leave 2020 in the dust. Welcome to day 8 of the 12 Days of Margaret. Today we're going to be going back to some typical booktube content, and we're going to talk about the books that I read in December. If you are new to the 12 Days of Margaret, I will have the playlist linked up top. We're just gonna go for it. It's gonna be up there, and you can watch the previous 7 days videos. Basically, all the 12 Days of Margaret is just an end of the year wrap-up / get to know me type of thing, and here we are, wrapping up the end of my year. December was not a terrible reading month for me. It was actually a pretty good one. I finished several books that I have been working on for a while. One of them I've been working on for most of the year. It's fine. It's not like reading books is like my favorite hobby or anything. Anyways, I really enjoyed the books I got in December. There were no bad books this month, thank goodness. Nothing that let me down as a book. Everything was exactly what I needed it to be or more. We will start out as usual with my stats for December. In December, I read 5 books. That came to 2,157 pages. The format of those books were 3 physical books, 1 audiobook, and one that I read partly audio, partly physical. The age category was 1 adult book and 4 YA books. The genre breakdown was 3 fantasy, 1 contemporary, and 1 nonfiction. For my ratings, the breakdown was 2 5 stars and 3 4 stars. And then I owned 3 of those books, and 2 of them I got from my library, saving me a total of $19.99. My favorite book of the month was Clockwork Princess by Cassandra Clare, a perennial fave, and my least favorite book was Fire by Kristen Cashore. Now that you have an idea of how my reading month went, let's go ahead and get into the books that I read in December. The first 2 I am going to talk about together because they are part of the same series, but don't worry, I will break them down. But they are Graceling and Fire by Kristen Cashore. The things you need to know about Graceling and Fire: it is a YA fantasy series of companion books. You do not necessarily have to have read these 2 books in order. Graceling does come chronologically later than Fire, even though it was the one that is published first. Both focus on girls with power. Katza is a Graceling, and that means that basically she has been born with a special talent. All Gracelings are owned by the king. Katza has spent almost all of her life in his court. She has the grace of killing. Fire is what is known as a monster. In her country, monsters are just the name for creatures that are similar to regular creatures, but they are brightly colored and very, very irresistible to normal humans and animals. Both of these books do hold up incredibly well, despite the fact that they were written almost 10 years ago. They explore things like gender, disability, and assault in ways that feel very modern. If you enjoy books that examine those things, if you enjoy books that kind of have found family, if you enjoy books about girls who are trying to find their place in the world and are trying to assert themselves and find out who they are in a world that is not necessarily acquiescent to them, these are really good books for you. I agreed to be part of a Graceling read-along. I will have the first 2 live shows for these books linked down below in my description box, so you can go check those out. They are on Sarah at Sarah the Dreamer's channel and Christine at the other Christine's that Reads channel. These are actually rereads. I read the first 2 books in 2014 and then just never got around to finishing the series back when it was just a trilogy, and so this seemed like a really good opportunity for me to be reading the book. Graceling, I would say, is my favorite of the 2. I really enjoyed reading these books, but I didn't like love them. They're not new faves. I gave them 5 stars the first time I read them, and they got 4 stars this time. They just didn't have that fuzzy feeling that I need books to have if they're gonna get 5 stars, but I did really enjoy them. I found Graceling a little bit harder to get into at the beginning for reasons. Despite the fact that both have very fast-paced beginnings, I just found Graceling a bit harder to get into. Part of that probably was Katza, because Katza is not... She is an unlikable narrator. She is very hard to kind of get close to and get cuddly with. She's very, very sharp and edgy and has a lot of drama and just issues going on with her. That said, I do still really like Katza. I think she's a little bit different than we see in a lot of YA heroine protagonist. I feel like a lot of authors would be hesitant to write a female character that is as prickly as Katza is, despite the fact that Katza has very good reasons to not trust people the way she does and to have issues with some of the graces and powers. But I do like her. I do sympathize with her. I do understand where she's coming from, and I think that's the most important. It's not necessarily having a likable character, but having a character that you can sit there and you go, okay, I understand why you're making the decisions that you're making, and I did. I did really like the pacing of this book. I think the way that Kristen Cashore took events that would be very boring, just very mundane, and she managed to continually up the stakes as you are going through this novel, and in ways that really do, like, harm her characters. Like, just, she's mean to them, and I appreciate it, and I like it, and ugh, that ending. Yeah, the ending is probably why I like this book more, just because, yeah, that ending. I am such a sucker for those kinds of scenes. Anyways, I'm not going to tell you what it is because then it tells you some of the plot details, and spoiler, there are people on my channel who are going to disagree with me, but I did really like the relationship dynamic between Katza and the love interest because I felt like it's not something, like there was a heavy emphasis on these two people working through what their relationship is going to be like. I just like the fact that they work through the fact that their relationship is not traditional, that Katza has no desire for a traditional relationship, and I think a lot of the time that's just ignored and, you know, kind of like, oh, you'll feel different about that one day, and the love interest doesn't do that. He just accepts Katza as she is, and she accepts him as he is, and it's just, I like the way they worked through that. I was sad that Katza, like, and I understand this is a totally valid viewpoint. I know there are people that are out there that don't want to be married at all, that don't want, like, I understand that, but I did feel really bad for Katza that the only real, like, example of marriage or understanding of marriage that she had was of a woman being owned, which very much historically accurate. So, like, I can't be mad about it, but I did just really feel bad for her because, like, that's not how it's supposed to work. That really, at least not in this day and age, is not how it's supposed to work. And I wish she'd grown up where that was an option, and so it was more about her personal feelings about whether or not she wanted to be married and not about, like, I don't want to be owned. So Fire was a lot easier to get into from the very beginning, which is really funny because the relationship is not as, like, out there and in the open at the beginning of this novel as it is in Graceling. Like, Graceling is very much, like, straight into the relationship and the interplay between the two main characters, and this, we have many chapters before we actually meet the love interest in this book, and also there's a lot of stuff that they got to work through themselves before they're even, like, able to be around each other and stand each other. And so, well, specifically one of them needs to work through. Somehow I feel like I like this relationship a little bit better, but then I don't. I'm not, like, I feel very conflicted because, like, there wasn't as much of the relationship in this book. I feel like if there had been more of them being able to build that relationship, more of us seeing them both together, I think this would have been a 5-star book if we had gotten just a little more than we got between the two of them, because I think a lot of what goes down is inner thoughts and Fire examining things and thinking about things and learning things about the love interest while he's not necessarily around and there. And so, like, she knows him, she knows about him, and then she learns things about him that kind of change her perspective on him, and that's when things start to kind of get moving for her. But, like, I don't know, I feel like I would have liked a little more interaction between them. I felt like some of it, like, once we got to the point where they're actually definitely having feelings, like, it's good, but, like, that it felt like a little bit of a fast turnaround for the feelings. Almost, like, not insta-lovey, but yes, insta-lovey, I'm not entirely sure, okay? I do think that this one had a few more pacing issues than Graceling did. I didn't really mind them because some of the pacing issues revolved around a character that I didn't care for. Just was like, oh, okay, that's fine. Like, there was build up to something that happened, and I was like, we could have done that better, but again, it wasn't about her relationship with that person, it was about Fire herself and kind of learning to love herself. That's what this book is about. I will say I wanted just to strangle the men in this novel. So many of them were just, like, would not control themselves around the main character, and that frustrates me, and I'm like so over that narrative that men can't control themselves, because they can. Because there are men out there that do it all the time. So, like, can we stop? It's not an excuse, boys. Content warnings for, like, sexual assault and unwanted sexual advances, and also fertility issues or reproductive issues. There's a lot of that that's examined in this book, especially for Fire, because Fire herself wants kids but has decided she should not have them. So just know going into that, like, that's a thing. The next book we need to talk about is another reread, and that is Clockwork Princess by Cassandra Clare. What you need to know about Clockwork Princess is that it is the third book in the Infernal Devices series. This is one of Cassandra Clare's Shadowhunter Saga series. They're all interconnected. This is chronologically the first one. It follows Tessa and Will and Jim. Tessa is a supposedly normal girl who ends up getting drawn into the world of Shadowhunters when she is kidnapped by a pair of warlocks. If you like books about magical girls, if you like books about found family, if you enjoy Cassandra Clare's work, this is going to be a really great book for you. This is my favorite book in the Infernal Devices series, which is probably my favorite Shadowhunter series to exist. Like, I've reread it so many times. I think I may officially have reread this book or this series more times than I have reread The Mortal Instruments, because I think I've only reread The Mortal Instruments twice, and I reread this 3 times. I just love the relationship between the 3 main characters in this series. I love the deep abiding friendship that Will and Jim have. In my you know, I know there are other people that interpret it differently, but I love this idea that you can be so emotionally and physically intimate with someone and not have it be about romance. I just think we need to see more of that both between men and women and the opposite genders. Like this idea that like you can have very deep, lasting, like loving friendships and have affection and be affectionate and not have to worry about like it being a romantic. Every scrap of affection you get from someone does not mean that they're going to be romantically involved in you. That's just too much for any one person to handle. I just love these series. I think that Will Herondale currently is the superior Herondale boy, and I love Tessa Gray. I love the fact that like she doesn't necessarily have all of the tools that, for example, Will and Jim have because she hasn't been training all of her life, but she still is one of those characters that like cannot be held down. She's not going to let people stop her. She is going to do everything she can to remedy situations and take care of herself, and I just love that. I appreciate it. And yes, you should read this series. If you read no other Cassandra Clare series, just read this one. After that, I finished The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. What you need to know about The Color of Law is that it is an adult non-fiction, and it focuses on the way our government actually perpetuated segregation in the United States of America. It goes over the way that the government supported banks and homeowners associations and different practices that communities and institutions would have. It goes into the way that it did not check those institutions, the way that it contributed to segregation, and it kind of breaks down why our country is built the way that it is built in the modern era. This is a nonfiction that I picked up a couple of months ago. I thought it was really good. I thought that the way Richard Rothstein laid out the information really made sense, at least for my brain. Like, I liked how he divided it into sections, and each section would kind of take a glimpse of how that had been handled over, I think he starts in the early 1900s and goes all the way up to the present as far as he can. This was published in 2016. I thought everything that he covered was linked really well, that it was well thought out. I felt like he didn't depend on you remembering things from previous chapters, so he would bring them up again and like kind of go over them again a little bit. So when he brought those up again, he would still remember to give you like context clues and all of that. I think it was really good material, and I felt he did a really good job of building that non-fiction narrative so it was easy to understand what was going on, and I thought he imparted that information in a very digestible way. And the last book that I read in 2020 was one that I wasn't expecting to love quite as much as I did, but oh my gosh, it was Save the Date by Morgan Matson. What you need to know about Save the Date is it is a YA contemporary series focusing on Charlie and her family. This goes over the course of a weekend as her sister is getting ready to be married in their childhood home, which is being sold. Unfortunately for everyone involved, things didn't go as planned with the wedding planner, and so now they're kind of having to scramble at the last minute to make up for many of the things that she left undone. This is a great book if you enjoy books that explore family dynamics, that go into childhood and memory. If you enjoy books that have lots of mayhem and chaos happening, this is a really good book to read. So this book is usually one that I would not like. It's very plot driven. I'm not usually a plot driven person. If you don't hook me with the characters, if the plot is the main thing that's happening, I'm not necessarily going to be invested. I really need to be invested in the characters. However, Morgan Matson managed to balance plot and character really well. Like, we never get a true deep dive into anybody other than Charlie, whose head we are in, but she still gave you enough for each of Charlie's siblings, for all the people in her family, and the people that she came in contact with. She gave you enough of them to still get a good idea of who this character was. You got real good snapshot. It was super cute. There was so much going on in this wedding, and I felt like she really just packed in the problems. No wedding is ever going to have as many issues as this wedding had. Like, it's got to be statistically impossible, and yet she still managed to find ways for things to go wrong. Fun fact, I have in fact been at a wedding where the cake fell on the ground, and we still ate it. The one thing that really bugged me about this is that Charlie is like 18. She is just going into college, and there is so much that her older siblings just depend on her for. Like, there were just so many places where I was like, why are you expecting the 18-year-old to be the adult in this situation? Even with her parents, I was just like, guys, you are taking Charlie for granted. You need to not do this. She is doing so much, and you should be more appreciative. I just felt like this packed a punch. I was expecting something light. I was expecting something that was fun, and it really just hit that emotional depth that I still needed, and I also appreciated the kind of fact that there was very little romance in this. Like, I like where we were going with what was happening, but the romance was kind of just a little glimmer in the story. It really wasn't anything that was the main focus, and for someone who likes stories where the romance is the main focus, or at least a huge part of the plot, I did appreciate how we handled all of that and everything that happened with that, and I do like the guy that, like, yeah, I just like how that I like how that resolved. I thought that was, for a book that is a YA book, I thought that that was a really good way to resolve that kind of thing. If you are feeling chatty today and you've read any of these, go ahead and talk to me about them in the comments, or you can let me know what was your last read of 2020. If you are not feeling chatty, just feel free to leave me an emoji. I know sometimes you don't have a lot of words and you watch a lot of videos in one day. That is it for now, my friends. Happy reading, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!